Welcome to Design Performance Frontiers. This is the first of a series of conversations with practitioners in the practical application of AI. So first, I'd like to introduce Paul Golding, Director of Frontier AI, who's been a mentor and advisor of mine for many years. And myself, I'm Managing Director of Performance by Design. So together, we think we can deliver really outstanding results based on our decades of experience, Paul. It is quite extraordinary how we've seen the evolution of AI over the years in multiple sectors. So I think we started in telecoms, media, entertainment, but since then, our respective trajectories have taken us into gas, water, electricity, telecoms, transport, energy transition, and the environment, even business and banking and insurance in your case. So listen, when I started as an engineer, I always thought that knowledge-based systems was the first stepping stone towards proper artificial intelligence. And then came along machine learning, which I found particularly impactful. And then that got enhanced by deep learning, with neural networks being the common thread throughout. But now we've come across generative AI really coming of age. But it doesn't really matter what wave we've gone through. I've always found that the application, the practical application, follows the same thread. We begin with decision support, helping the person who's responsible for design or operations more likely make the right decision more of the time. Then we get to cognitive enhancement, where we can make individuals whose innate experience might suggest that they would not make the best decisions. But when they're underpinned by machine learning with maybe a decade's worth of training, they do make far better decisions than you might expect, even if they're a fresh graduate. And then in some cases, we end up with full autonomy, where we don't need to present the options for the human to make the judgment call. There's really only one correct decision. And when we can do that, we have changed the game in some industries, in some processes, and some operations. What would you say is your journey in AI? Because I remember it was you that coined the phrase for me when we worked together at McLaren and we were setting up their decision intelligence capability, that you basically suggested that we would apply AI powered by data for descriptive intelligence, then predictive intelligence, and ultimately prescriptive intelligence, when the machine would suggest the winning move, in your words. And I did think that was a game changer, and yet that was 10 years ago, and I'm not sure that doesn't still apply today. Tell us a little bit about how you got here and your journey for AI.
Yeah, well, thanks, Geoff. My journey is a quite long one because I started with AI during the so-called AI winter, when there wasn't much hope that it was going to go anywhere. But I come from a signal processing background, designing chips, silicon chips for mobile applications. And so in signal processing, the statistical nature of that problem is largely what today we would call machine learning. So it's nothing new actually to me, and it's been around for a long time. What is new is the neural networks, and then, or rather neural networks that actually work, as in deep learning. And then the sort of effective application of these technologies has obviously come on a long way. I think largely thanks to big data and computing power. So yeah, when you and I met, we had this conversation about analytics and prescriptive analytics in particular, the notion that it could decide for you. I agree with you that whilst the technology has come on leaps and bounds, in many enterprises, this full autonomous decision making is still absent, and I think there's good reasons for that. But to pick on one thing you mentioned about the AI in a sort of self-contained application doing a function, enhancing an existing function, such as predicting the price, say, of goods, or the propensity for a client to buy your product in sales. Those are different applications from the cognitive enhancement ones, where the AI is trying to really, if you like, amplify our human intelligence in processes that were typically involve a lot of cognitive processes. That's only really becoming possible because of the generative AI movement, the new models that allow us to do a lot more with language, which sits at the heart of any complex process, business process. So because of that, I think we are beginning to move into this era of prescriptive analytics. But I think most people are still in the predictive phase, and even then, not that comprehensively.
Yeah, I think that's my observation too. Actually, I would say predictive is not actually that pervasive. And yet at the moment, we're sort of drowned out by the cacophony of people talking about generative AI and ChatGPT. But I would just like to get your perspective on what some people are referring to as traditional AI. My perspective is, just because it works, it may not be that sexy. But when is traditional AI fit for purpose? And what are the exceptional cases where maybe we accept that traditional isn't up to scratch and we do need generative AI? Where's the crossover point?
That's a good question. I think that there are a huge number of unmet needs or unsolved problems in the average enterprise that could be solved using, let's say, ordinary machine learning or AI, without the generative aspect, without something generating images or language or video. And the crossover really, I think that the generative side, where it will actually become powerful, is in enabling people to actually build these straightforward machine learning and AI enhancements by removing a lot of the specialist knowledge that was typically required for someone to build such solutions. So in most organizations, there's a very strange phenomenon, I think, around the subject of data science, that it gets treated almost like it's some special priesthood, that if you don't have, a PhD, or you can't recite Bayes' theorem, you're not really a data scientist, you shouldn't be touching data. Of course, that's absurd, because the biggest analytics tool in the world is the humble spreadsheet. And no one needs to ask permission to use a spreadsheet. That would be an absurdity. Yet often in enterprises I come across, you need permission to use the data science tools, to have the Jupyter notebooks on your laptop. And in fact, I think the game is over in a way for some of these absurd barriers, because it is perfectly feasible for someone with a modicum of numerical understanding and who can power a spreadsheet to now use machine learning to solve real problems and add business value. And I think that's where the generative side will help more, as a kind of amplifier to help us do more of the traditional AI.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think data science was a very narrow church, and it was really hard to participate. But now we've effectively democratized some of the tools, and maybe shone a light on the viability of some of the traditional AI methods, which, as you rightly say, some of these classic problems like supply and demand matching, they've still not been solved. We got many miles to go on improving on our decision-making capability. So the topic du jour at the moment is large language models. Everybody's talking about it. And not a lot of people probably know exactly what that means. Like, why is it really relevant to generative AI? And what's your perspective of large language models? I understand you've been working in this field for quite some time, and it's only now that it's on the tip of everybody's tongue in the market.
Yeah, so the large language models, they're called large because they consume so much data, and in doing so require an extraordinarily large computational resource to do so. So they are hard to build in the sense of the engineering feat of handling such a large amount of data, and expensive. But the actual underlying principle is not that complicated. Like a lot of things in AI and machine learning, the real advancements have come due to Moore's law. The fact that we have huge amounts of computation that can be dynamically assigned in the cloud to problems. So the large language models, it turns out that when you train a deep net with this massive amount of language, it goes through this kind of like leap in performance when you hit such large scales. And there's simple reason for that is it turns out that if you look at all of the internet and apply this underlying principle, which we can discuss if you like, most of what you need to process language is embedded or encoded in the language itself. So you don't need some fancy sort of rules or algorithm to figure out every single permutation of, say, the English language. If you actually observe most permutations, or many, you have the ability by the data alone to do really quite amazing things with that model once you've trained it.
So if I understand, yeah, the evolution of large language models has become possible through massive compute capability and huge data availability. Also, I've heard that transformer models have helped with the development of algorithms more efficiently, but it all sounds extremely expensive and therefore out of the reach of the everyday person that's trying to apply AI. And yet at the top of this conversation, we were talking about how accessible it now is to everybody. So what's changed? Why is it that it's now accessible to somebody who doesn't have hundreds of millions to invest in training the model?
Well, we might want to refine what we mean by accessible. So the actual models themselves, once they're trained, the vast amount of the computational expense is in the training of the model and the processing of this large amount of data, which, as you correctly pointed out, the reason we can do this now is because of data availability, and that's thanks to the internet. There's just so much stuff out there. So this training, if you need, hundreds of thousands of computers, that's expensive. But once the model is trained, you can now use it in a different modality, which is to, give it an input and ask it now to predict an output, like what's the next word in this sentence. And that's the so-called inference mode. And that's relatively cheap. So once a model has been trained, it can be hosted in the cloud, and then you can call it using, an API, a programming method to access that model, and that makes it available to anyone the same way, you can use an API to send a tweet. So it really does make it accessible to anyone who wants to experiment or then use these models in anger. Now, there's different flavors of the model and things like fine tuning to adapt it to your particular knowledge, and all of those things. They are more complex, but I still believe, and well, it's not a matter of belief, they are accessible to a wide number of organizations now.
That's really interesting. So it's almost a common theme with innovation with data, that it doesn't necessarily require you to copy the data to your customers. once you produce the model from the data and it's been trained properly, it's quite a light touch, isn't it, to then give the model that can deliver the insights that the third party needs. So that's great. So if that's the case, that we can now get phenomenal insights based on huge amounts of training data without necessarily the cost of the training, you could think that if a company has a strategy, it might be asking the question, how does AI apply to the strategy that they have to achieve their goals? And equally, or conversely, could the capabilities of AI redefine the strategy itself? So we could be thinking of this both ways around. It's probably not that common, but certainly the capabilities are so radical that it just does beg the question, could AI be something that shapes the definition of a strategy for some companies? And certainly most companies are asking themselves the question, how does it apply to their current strategy? What do you think?
I agree with you. So, as with most paradigm changing technologies, like the web, mobile, and so many other things out there, you can always approach it from two perspectives. One is, what can it do to enhance my existing processes and my existing strategy? And for the large part, most businesses, they are even not that good at answering that question. Then there's a second question, given the apparent shift that this new generation of AI, these foundational models and generative AI has brought into the configuration, how might my strategy be different? So there's existing strategy plus AI, and then there's new strategy because of AI. And almost no one's asking that second question. And I think largely many people don't know how to ask it, and certainly don't know how to answer it.
It's interesting.
Now we can get into the, carry on.
I'm going to say it's interesting because, you know, in most commercial applications where we're looking to lead strategic innovation, we start with the customer pain point, and then we look for the best available technology to deliver the art of the possible. I think nowadays it's almost impossible not to include AI in that discussion. And yet, as you just said there, it's really not that common. So people are really uncomfortable suggesting, how does AI shape my strategy? But even the traditional or the normal way of running strategy is to say, what's the best available technology out there, and how does that shape my thinking to deliver on the strategy expectations? And we're really at the cusp of a big change here, where people need to understand which type of AI will have the most influence and impact on their strategy and its execution, traditional or generative. So this brings me to the next question, sort of. I know it's not a common skill within an organization, but maybe it's a broad question, but how would somebody go about assessing their AI readiness even? Surely the gut feel is, if I don't embrace AI, I might miss out and I might lose my competitive advantage. But how do I assess whether my organization is even ready to embrace it? Have you any experience in that?
Yes. Well, I mean, as an applied technologist, I mean, I don't sit in research labs writing papers. I've spent many years sitting in companies being paid to deliver using deep tech, and if you don't, you're out of a job. So you know, one learns how to apply technology through that process. There's a number of perspectives on asking the question that, you know, how are you ready for AI? And you know, there's almost like a checklist one could go through, but I'll stick, if I may, to a kind of mode of thinking. So many organizations have become familiar with quote unquote design thinking, which is, you know, trying to understand problems from a user-centric point of view. I think there is a need for some kind of equivalent there in the AI or machine learning world, which you might call model thinking, or that's what I call it. And I think that many people just don't know what the AI and machine learning is capable of, and how easy it is now to apply it, at least experimentally. What I call direct AI, which is the fact that I believe that many people working in organizations are perfectly capable of experimenting now and applying the AI directly themselves without having to go and hire, a legion of PhD AI engineers or data scientists. So the key part in the AI readiness, the initial part, is having an understanding of its capabilities and then knowing how to spot opportunities that could be solved by AI. A very simple example, you can take an average grocery store and look at hundreds of logistics problems which they are solving using spreadsheets or clipboards that, for all they know, could easily be solved right now, and with significant cost savings or productivity enhancements using AI or machine learning. They just don't know how to do it. They don't know how to think about those problems. So you do require this kind of education, I think, around model thinking. And in my experience, many organizations are poorly prepared in that regard. And even, frankly speaking, so are some of the data scientists, because you have to, and there's a real anecdote here. I spoke to the CIO of a major chain of stores. I mean, it's a huge company, and he told me that their data science team was disbanded. And when I asked why, he said, well, they couldn't think of what problems to work on, and so they were twiddling their thumbs. Now, this is a kind of absurd position to be in, but there's a good reason for it, which is that the people who are, working on the coal face, so to speak, they are familiar with the problems. And so they're probably better to define them rather than the data scientists. And the tools are moving now in this direction because of automation, because of generative AI, that the workers, quote unquote, can get their hands dirty and get on with solving problems using AI. And I think that's the thing that you need to prepare for, be ready for. Allow anyone in your organization to innovate using machine learning and AI. And, to be ready for that, then you're ready for AI.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think it comes back to when you're trying to lead strategic innovation that's digital, it does start with design. It's not a common skill, but nor is it relegated to a specialist team of data scientists or AI gurus, because they're not normally the people who are best at design. So it has to start with identifying the pain point in the organization or with the customer, and then translators, if you will, who can curate a solution from available technologies. But what is exciting at the moment is you don't need to be a specialist in AI to apply it. So it's almost a common citizen, as I've heard you call it, Paul, in the past, that they can now apply AI to good effect if they understand their business needs.
Yeah,
so that actually brings me to,
carry on.
No, I was going to change direction, but it just brought me to the point about data and the quality of data and the importance of assessing the quality of data before you start to tackle that design challenge that you think you've identified, because quite often that can take up more of the time than the time required with the data science team actually to deliver a solution. Do you have a point of view, sort of practical guidelines to do a quick data quality audit before you commit to any AI powered program?
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely, of course, AI and machine learning requires data. And so when I kind of glibly say, though, well, anyone on the coal front can now use this these tools, in reality, that's probably quite difficult. The reason being is that it's hard to access data. So really, there's a whole other world out there outside of AI and machine learning about data, and data operations, data ops, and all of these kinds of things. And the sort of term du jour is self-serve, which in itself has many meanings. But simply put, it ought to be the case that anyone in the organization should be able to access the data they need when they need it in the format they need it to do the work, whether that's putting it in a spreadsheet or, in this case, putting it into some kind of AI tool, which increasingly, as I said, you'll be able to run yourself, either because they don't require any coding or because the generative AI tools will write the code for you. So this data democratization still has a long way to go, but it's absolutely critical and would be a major one of the items I mentioned on the checklist for AI readiness. So, you know, never mind whether or not you can think of a good idea or a use case for AI using design thinking and model thinking or whatever techniques are available to you, you won't be able to do much if you can't access the data. So data quality is one aspect of that. Often the data has issues with it, and it's commonly a problem that you can't access the data because you don't know what the column names are, you don't know where to find it. So you're quite correct. This is a truism, you know, that people say, oh, this is the lament of many data scientists. I joined up to do data science and I ended up spending most of my time doing data munging. Well, that's just the state of many enterprises in terms of their data capabilities.
It's interesting because in some countries, I think we're seeing some quite radical progress with open data initiatives. And actually that would present vast amounts of quality data in a standardized format, maybe from multiple participants in a common industry, and then allow maybe startups or big companies to access that data and innovate with it. So I think that confluence of good quality data available for a wider community, that is democratization. And then people being able to apply tools to good effect, that's where their creativity could be focused. That could be one of the best ways to accelerate our ability to tackle the effects of climate change on the way we run many businesses. It's a nascent movement at the moment, but I think it's sounding the death knell of data monetization. This whole notion of people's data is the prize asset in the business. Well, should it be, if it could help support the net zero imperative? So I've seen it in a small scale starting in the UK, and I like it because it gets us away from something that I was never a fan of, which was big data. I forget the wag that said the time of big data has arrived, but the time of big insight has yet to come. And I still don't think it's arrived. You know, that's not the solution, hoovering up every bit of data we can find. I think a bit of intelligence, experimental design, model design, to use your term, and then we collect the data that we think will be most impactful for model development and most insightful. So look forward to seeing developments in that area. So we've been in AI, we said at the top of the conversation, for decades. And AI has been on a hype curve before. It's also been through a number of winters. This time it does feel different to me, probably to you. Where do you see the next design performance frontier taking place?
Well, that's a good question. I do believe that the innovation around these foundational models is we haven't seen anything yet, and I think that we're still struggling to figure out what can you do with these new capabilities. So if we go back to the earlier conversation, we said you can enhance many processes using AI. That has definitely the case now more than ever, because it turns out that in business, a lot of processes, as we might expect, are built upon language. And if you have a machine now that can understand language at the human or beyond level, then clearly those machines can enhance many business processes. And I think that's largely what people are trying to do, although, you know, most of the use cases I've seen are, I would call standard ones, just turbocharged. So, for example, many companies struggle to label things. They want to know, you know, I have these 1,000 transcripts of phone calls. What are they about? Those tasks are much easier now with the new models. But the more interesting question is, you know, if you remember when the web came along, many companies thought it was, oh, this is kind of like a new brochure or a new, you know, shop window, and they treated it like the old world digitized, which turned out to be fundamentally different from being digital, figuring out
Yes.
brand new ways of doing things, which Amazon did, and many companies, you know, cloud computing came along. New paradigms are built on top of these foundations. So I think we will see this with the new models. So go back to your earlier point that, you know, often a good starting point in any transformation process is to identify pain points. A lot of the pain points that we tend to identify are users' pain with existing offerings, with existing tools, with existing interfaces. And so we set about trying to improve them, which is kind of a tinkering at the edges. But with generative AI, it's plausible that there are entirely new ways of thinking about how to solve problems, how to run businesses, even what a business means, quite frankly speaking. At the end of the day, a business is this complex, interwoven fabric of something, brains and data, and we haven't had a lever like this before. So I expect there to be some genuine quote unquote disruption from these models, and I think that will happen in the next few years. So the frontier really is, how do you harness these models in entirely new ways? Because some people will, and when they do, everyone will have to either adapt or die, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's where the attractiveness of the community of citizen coders kicks in, because now we're all coders because we can all apply some of this technology, and that will introduce some surprising perspectives. So it's exciting times, Paul. I think that's it for today. So thank you for your time in this conversation. As I said at the top, this is the first of a series of conversations, and I look forward to the next time we meet. Thank you again. Paul Golding,
Thanks, Geoff.
Director of Frontier AI. Thank you.